Well, welcome back to Perspectives. Darren Jaime here with you. We are talking about America's economic crisis, the $700 billion rescue plan that is taking place across America. President Bush, of course, putting some money into the hands of banks to try to help alleviate what is definitely the worst economic crisis that America has seen in years. Our guest in studio, Robert Nolan, Budget Director for the Borough of the Bronx. And as we were sharing a little bit before the break, you were sharing a little bit about how Roosevelt was bringing these people together and saying, what works? Now, let's bring it to you. How do you make the adjustment for what's going on in America? How do you make those adjustments for the Bronx to make it work?
Well, we've already seen that some of the president's initial proposals did not work. Yes, it takes a while to implement the $700 billion plan, but people are impatient. The market went down more than 1,800 points. So instead of providing monies and promising monies would be available, now what the president has done with members of Congress is they've decided that the federal government will take ownership in some of the banks across the country to provide these loans to these banks so the banks can then lend money directly to businesses and to the American public. Because the concern is that if the money is made available to the banks, they might keep the money, they might hoard it. Nobody is benefited if the banks hoard the money. We are only benefited as a society if the banks engage in loans and provide loans to Americans and provide loans to each other. In the last couple of weeks, banks have refused to lend each other money, and most people aren't aware that banks lend each other money all the time. But now banks have said, no, we don't have the money to give to you, and that has created a very serious problem. So with the leadership in Washington now, they're going to try this. And Darren, we're hopeful that this is going to work. But if it doesn't work, they're going to try something else. Like I was saying, this is what Roosevelt did in the 30s. He continued to try things until he found something that worked. And when he found something that worked, he did it.
America has this foreclosure crisis.
Yes.
Here in the borough of the Bronx, what measures are being taken to help Bronxites to avoid and help them through the possibility of foreclosure?
Well, Borough President Carrion has been very active in this area, and he's made it clear that what Bronxites should be doing is going to their banks and sitting down, not at the last minute, not at the month when they're really worried about being able to make the next monthly payment. They should now be worried about November. They should be going to their banks and sitting down with their bankers and explaining to them that they have a problem, that they may not be able to make their November payment, and they may not be able to make their December payment. Too many Bronxites wound up getting the types of loans that are not fixed loans, and they wound up not being able to afford the very large interest that occurred because of that. I think what we really need to do is to have banks go back to doing what they did for decades, where they made a lot of money and people bought homes, and that was to offer the 30-year fixed rate 6 or 7% mortgage. It worked very well for so many decades during the 50s and 60s and 70s. It's what made America great. It's what enabled people to buy homes and to stay in those homes. These new mortgage instruments have created very serious problems for Bronxites, although we're not as seriously impacted as the borough of Queens. But if you live in Wakefield or if you live in Morrisania and you have one of those loans and you can't pay it, then, Darren, you're impacted.
That's right.
So even though the percentages might be worse than other boroughs,
even if it's one person.
Absolutely. If that one person, for that one person, it's a very serious problem, and it's something that they really need to go to their bank as soon as possible and just lay everything out and try to work something out with those banks. In the past, the banks have not been willing, I understand, to make deals with individual homeowners. And they really should be making those deals, because in the end, the banks will make money and the homeowners will stay in their homes. We don't benefit as a society if a homeowner has to give up his home and go out. Where's that person going to go? Where are they going to live? So we don't really benefit that way. So we benefit if the banks come in and they offer to go halfway with that homeowner and turn that mortgage into a fixed mortgage that the homeowner can afford.
In addition to homeowners, we know the issue of employment is major. And before I get into this next question, once again, I want to remind you that if you want to call us today, it's 718-960-7241, where we are talking about the economic state of America and really how it is affecting Bronxites. You can really touch base with Robert Nolan, who is the Budget Director of the Borough of the Bronx. And if you have a question, just make sure that you give us a call and you can chime in on our conversation. We've had a major problem here in the Bronx, and it's been one of unemployment. We know that for years, because ever since I've been a reporter here at this station, we've always been touted as the borough with the highest unemployment rate. We know in, I think it was 2003, 10.5%. We're down now to 7%. So that is a 3%. Yes. That is a 3% decrease, and that's good. Question coming is, how how are we going to look in the future, given the economic state with what's going on with the $700 billion plan? Is our unemployment rate going to see an increase now?
Well, we certainly hope we will not see an increase in the short term. As I said earlier, there aren't as many Bronxites employed in the financial sector where the greatest worry is now. We're employed more in the hospitals. But when it comes to our hospitals, the state of New York has a very serious budget crisis, a greater crisis than the city of New York. And a disproportionate amount of money comes from the state to support our hospitals. So if we can expect that the state is going to wind up cutting back their aid to Bronx hospitals, then that could indirectly impact on people who work at Bronx hospitals. So we have to watch out for that. We have to watch out for the state budget. Governor Patterson is trying to get his hands around this very serious problem that he has on the state level. He's now called for $2 billion in reductions in state aid, and that could have an impact on our Bronx hospitals. It will have an impact on education. One of the largest amounts of money the state gives to the city is education aid. And last year they came through big time with a lot of pressure from the city to provide actually millions of dollars in additional funding for the city of New York. We're now very concerned, Borough President Karen is extremely concerned about that state aid continuing to flow into our schools in the borough. Because that has, with that money, they've been able to keep the number of class sizes smaller, and they've been able to hire more teachers, and we certainly want to make sure that those dollars from the state continue to flow. But he's very concerned about that.
The not-for-profit sector is also somebody that's very concerned, because we know that throughout the years, whether it's through the state, there's always dramatic cuts affecting the not-for-profit sector, with the lack of access to income and capital coming down all the way from Washington. Are we going to see not-for-profits become even further hampered by this crisis?
Darren, non-for-profits are in for a very tough time. And unfortunately, again, this time of year, the fall, is the season when the non-profits raise their money. Everyone from the zoo to the garden, in most cases, Wave Hill or other smaller institutions, this is when they go to the banks, they go to the insurance companies, and they're able to bring in money to carry them through for the next year. Some of those banks and investment companies like Lehman Brothers is not there anymore. Other banks have been eaten up by other companies, so the amount of money available for nonprofits will be less than was available last year. And that's really not a good thing, especially coming now, because this is when they raise those dollars. And you can expect the mayor's call for cuts of 2.5% this fiscal year and 5% next year beginning on July 1. And there will be cuts in cultural affairs, which means that there will be cuts in program monies to each one of our institutions as well as to our cultural programs. So they really are in a very, very difficult situation because of the fact of the timing of when our economy went sour, because they need to raise these dollars now to carry them through the rest of the year. So we're very worried about the cultural groups and all the nonprofit groups.